The title of the presentation is Genetic and Environmental Influences on Cognitive Aging.
Can you hear me if I don't talk about it? That's occupational hazard I'm used to checking, right? So, yes, I'm going to talk about a little bit of my research. One of the things that we all like to do, that we all do every day in our lives, is try to explain behavior. We're trying to explain the behavior of our siblings, or our significant other, or our children, or our parents, or our professors. We all are trying to understand behavior. That's what we do as human beings, is try to understand human behavior. A behavior geneticist, which is what I am, tends to focus on two causes or reasons for why humans behave they do. And those are genes and environment. And twins help us investigate those reasons. So the basic logic of the twin study, the twin method, is that there are individual differences in any trait. Some people are taller than others. Some people are more outgoing than others. And this is the variability, or individual differences in the trait. And we're parsing, we're dividing those individual differences into three components in the simplest model. So we're going to take this pie of variance in the pie chart and divide it into three different pieces of variance. One is obviously the genetic factors, the genetic influences on behavior. But the other, we divide environment into two pieces, even in the simplest model. Shared environment is anything in the environment that makes you more similar to the people you grew up with. And so you grew up in the same house, you have the same parents, the same socioeconomic status. And non-shared environment is anything in the environment that makes you less similar to your siblings. You have your own peers and your own teachers and your own illnesses and your own accidents and your own college major and your own college. So they push in two different directions. Shared environment makes you more similar, non-shared environment makes you less similar. They're pushing in different ways. Heritability, which is a term you might have heard, is the percent of total variance explained by genetic factors. So it's that piece of the pie that's labeled G, that's heritability. So what's the answer? I say this because if I'm talking at a cocktail party and I'm talking about what I do and they get to this point and they're just about to go back to the bar, believe me, and they say, so what's the answer? And my answer is always, it depends. It depends on so many things, and that's when I really lose them usually. It depends on the trait, it depends on age, it depends on the environment, it depends on the method. The question can get really complicated really fast from that very simple pie chart we have. So for example, I've been doing for the last 20 years, I've been doing work on cognitive aging. Basic question is, do cognitive and mental or intellectual abilities decline with age? And the answer is, it depends. It always depends. It's never that simple. It depends because intelligence is not one thing. There's lots of different kinds of intelligence out there. And in psychology, we talk about the products of learning, the stuff you've known, the crystallized abilities, we call it. You know vocabulary, you know the date that Columbus crossed the ocean, and all these bits and facts that you've accumulated. Those tend to actually be pretty stable across the lifespan. But there's also the processes of learning, problem solving, speed of processing information. We call these fluid abilities because they are more fluid and they tend to decline. So I've been looking at this data with the Swedish Adoption Twin Study of Aging, or SATSA, let people pronounce that. It's a longitudinal twin study which gives us so much wealth of data to address some of these questions. There's 860 people who participated, and we're now in the 10th wave of data collection. It started in 1984, and I've been working with them since 1994, and then we're done. After 30 years, we're going to quit and just analyze data. So this is, for example, this is what decline looks like in 4 different intellectual domains. Verbal ability, vocabulary, being able to come up with words. You can see it's pretty flat, actually, until like age 75. Then it only goes down a little bit. Verbal ability, we tend to maintain. So you can do the crossword puzzles for the rest of your memory down here. You can see it's also still pretty flat until 70, but after 70 it does tend to go down a little fast. Get accelerating decline there. Spatial ability is things like being able to read maps and think in 3-dimensional images and rotate things in your head. That's going down kind of faster your whole life. This is from 50 to 85. You can't read the age across the bottom. And then speed, processing speed, that just declines your whole life. We're just getting slower and slower and slower from like age 27 on. So there's a very different answer depending on what trait you're looking at. But I'm less interested in what and more interested in why. Why are these changes occurring? So they occur. That is less interesting to me than why do they occur, and can we do something about it? So to what extent do genetic and environmental factors impact these age changes in cognitive abilities? And the answer is, of course, it depends. First, we have to figure out how we're going to measure change with age. And And so I'm going to do a little bit, very quick geometry review. You all had geometry, because you have to. So we define a line by two factors, right? The intercept, where it crosses the vertical axis. That should ring a bell, there's that intercept. And the rate of change of the slope, how fast that line goes down. So we can look at those two pieces, the intercept and the rate of change for any of those factors. And so we're going to have two answers for each trait. We're going to have a pie chart for the intercept, how much is due to genetic factors, shared environmental factors, non-shared environmental factors for the intercept. And we're going to have a different pie chart for the slope, where we're going to see how similar they are to each other and across those four cognitive measures. So here's the heritability of change for verbal ability, the one that stayed pretty flat your whole life. And already we see, well, wow, those two pie charts are very different. Very different. So for the intercept, which is just how high you're going to get, how high you're ever going to score in your lifetime, it's kind of your maximum potential score. Heritability around middle age is like almost 80%, 79% heritable. And only the remaining 20% is non-shared environment. Not much shared environment left when you get to this point in your lifespan. But the rate of change, heritability is 0%. Do you know how rare it is to find heritability with 0% wide field? Pretty darn rare. Everything's got a little bit of genetic stuff going on. But the rate of change, my data suggested, it certainly is close to, if not exactly, 0% heritability. It's all environment explaining how fast verbal ability declines with age. That suggests you can do something about that. I can't ethically modify your genes, but I can modify your environment. You can modify your environment, and maybe that'll help support your verbal ability with aging. Looks like there's a lot of room for intervention if it's all environment. For spatial ability, the answer is different. Not in the intercept side, actually. I'll give you the punchline. This pie chart on this side of the screen is never going to change. Andrew's the same no matter what. It's for rate of change. Now it's about 50-50. Half heritability, half environment for spatial ability. For memory, now the rate of change is about 70-30. 70% genetic, 30% environment. And for processing speed, again, it's just going to happen. It's 82% genetics and 20% environment for processing speed. You can see the answer really does depend whether we're talking about the intercept, or the rate of change, whether we're talking about what kind of intellectual ability we're talking about, verbal versus spatial versus processing. That just sums all that up. So what I want to say is that's just one step. There are more ways I can address this question because I have longitudinal twin data. The doctor really begged me not to put one of my fancy path diagrams in here with arrows pointing along the way, so I didn't. But using those fancy path diagrams, we can come up with some other answers. We can find out that the genes that impact processing speed drive subsequent changes in cognitive abilities. So that genes for processing speed are driving and causing subsequent later changes in processing in fluid intelligence. And then we can in other papers I found that genes for lung function drive subsequent genetic variants in processing speed. And then I find that genes for functional ability, just things like balance, flexibility, fine motor movement, just motor movements in various capacities, drive subsequent genetic variants and age changes in processing speed. Well, now I'm starting to see maybe I have a chain of events happen. So it's a possible cascade of effects. Maybe genetic factors affect lung function, which is how you get oxygen to your brain, which is important for continued brain function. Oxygen is good. So genetic factors impact lung function, which impacts functional ability, which impacts processing speed, which impacts cognitive aging. We're starting to piece this together. This is not the answer. It's a possible cascade of effects. But we're starting to piece together, maybe this is what's causing, which gets us to cognitive aging. And this is this model is identified by examining not genes. I haven't looked at genes at all yet in this example. But if I look at the genetic variants, by how the variance between traits is shared among twins, among twin pairs. But it provides a rationale for targeting specific genes or specific environments for searching for genes, things that impact cognitive aging. So if I want to impact cognitive aging, I should work out. I should, this is the other data that supports this, I should make sure I'm doing aerobic exercise or things that make sure I get oxygen to my brain. Oxygen and nutrients and everything. I'm using shorthand there, you know what I mean, you guys are. But I should also be looking for genes that impact lung function And those genes may, through a cascade of effects, impact cognitive aging. So it helps me, the human genome is a pretty big thing. If I'm trying to find a gene, if I can narrow it down to this location to look for a gene that's associated with cognitive aging, that's going to be helpful in my hunts. And so this kind of approach helps me target my search for both environmental influences and genetic factors that are going to impact cognitive aging. So, I like to quote David Licken, who is a professor up in Minnesota. The genes sing a prehistoric song that today should sometimes be resisted, but should never be. Thank you.